Good morning. It's a story that sounds like it's straight out of a movie, a horror movie. But it's real life, and it's unfolding in Connecticut. A 32-year-old man locked in a small room, only being let out for minutes a day, unknown to neighbors, unseen to all but a few. That man finally found his way to safety, falling into the arms of a firefighter who pulled off a rescue that ultimately gave him the freedom he'd been waiting for decades. Walter Hussey is a local defense attorney and legal analyst. He joins me to talk about the case this morning. Good morning, Walt.
Good morning, Eric.
So you have no, obviously, role in this defense, but if this lady here, Kimberly Sullivan, had called you when she was arrested, what do you tell her as a defense attorney?
I don't know where to start, Eric. I mean, I read the warrant. I mean, the allegations are horrific. It's such a difficult case. I've never seen anything like it.
So it sounds like it would be a tough case to even mount a real defense given the evidence that they have.
Yeah, I mean, the evidence is him. I mean, he's 32 years old. He's about 5'9", 5'10", and 68 pounds. I mean, that speaks for itself. How do you explain that? You know, I was talking to friends, and someone said to me, if he was an inmate, I mean, the state couldn't treat him like that. You wouldn't treat a dog like that. So I really don't know what the defense could be.
And then you look at, I read the warrant affidavit as well, and you look at some of the statements he made in the very first moments of being questioned. Plywood on the doors so he couldn't get out around the door to access his freedom. The slide lock that was there, that there had been other locks prior. Everything they looked at from his story checked out, which I think just continues to work against the stepmother.
Oh, I agree 100%. I mean, everything he did say did check out. But again, Eric, just his physical condition, like his teeth are rotting out of his mouth. He hadn't had a bath in God knows when. And it's deplorable. I mean, just really deplorable.
I know the defense attorney mantra is every defendant deserves a defense. So if you were hired by this lady to provide her defense, what do you say to her? What do you do at that point to try to best serve your client?
Well, to be fair to her and the defense attorney, yes, she is presumed innocent, and they do have to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. That much is true. But in this situation, I think you have to analyze it, Eric. Any case that I take, I kind of look at it as if I'm not a lawyer and just look at it as if it's a story and say, if I was a juror, if I was the first impression I heard this, what would I think? And I just don't have good thoughts about this. So I think what she would have to do, I can't see her going to trial. I think she would have to try to work the best deal that she possibly can get from the state. I imagine she doesn't have a prior record, but it's really hard to handicap.
Especially because it's such an unusual and horrific circumstance.
Exactly, Eric. There's no other case that I know of like this, and certainly not in Connecticut. So like I told you earlier, if it was a murder case, I can give you an idea what it might be worth. But something like this, it's anyone's guess.
All right, so let's look at some of the things that we have heard. There have been some statements made. One of them is that this young man's father lived in the home and was complicit in this for many years up until his death. Is that something that could provide any sort of defense for her?
Well, again, I don't know what she's saying, so to be fair to her, and maybe that's part of it. I mean, she could say this guy's some sort of Svengali that had cast a spell emotionally, physically, mentally on both of them, and so after he died, then what did she do? I mean, imagine that's probably going to be what she's going to say. I didn't know what to do. I mean, after 20 years of this, now the man's dead. Can she go to the police? Maybe not, and maybe that's really what she's going to say.
Also, in the arrest warrant affidavit, it talks about there being some stepsisters who, in addition to a deceased grandmother, who were aware of what was happening. Is there any exposure for those sisters if they knew of this treatment and didn't do anything affirmative about it?
Potentially, yes. I think that's going to be up to law enforcement. I think they're looking into that, but you know, you could certainly, if you wanted to, probably charge them with some sort of conspiracy.
And that's something that, you know, maybe down the line would be looked at?
Yeah, it could be. I don't want to speculate on that because I don't know how they feel about it. I have no idea what these two people, how long they were there, what they know, what they didn't know. So it's kind of unfair for me to say, but I think legally could probably, if you wanted to, charge them with a conspiracy.
A lot of the concern from our viewers that we've heard in comments is, of course, for this young man who now has escaped this captivity and has to somehow move forward with his life. Just from a legal perspective, not necessarily a defense attorney perspective, but what's next for him and who's going to make sure that he's taken care of here, Walt?
Well, I think he's going to have to get a conservator, right? And that'll be appointed by probate court. So typically it's an attorney, as you probably know, and it will be someone that can handle his affairs. I know he has a GoFundMe page, so he's going to have to manage that money. I think he could probably get involved with the Department of Developmental Services. They could give him a caseworker. They could get him the needs that he needs, Husky insurance, the physical care, the mental care, whatever he needs, probably SSI, SSD. So there's some avenues that are available to him.
There is discussion in what is publicly available, the arrest warrant affidavit and other reports, that, you know, obviously he had a 4th grade education before he stopped going to school, that there are other intellectual deficits because of that. But one thing that struck me as I read that affidavit, and I wonder if you had the same thought, he appears to have crafted a pretty outrageous plan to escape captivity, up to where he said he could have walked out of the house, but he chose to be rescued because he needed that firefighter to grab him so he could complete his escape. I was struck by his cunning in all this. Yeah,
it's really hard to understand being in that position. Think about it. In a room 5 by 8 with no light, just no interaction with anyone. I mean, it's a crazy set of facts. Think disappearing at age 10 from the face of the earth, essentially what happened to him, and then held captive in his own home, and no one knows. Like, no one, not a mailman, not an Amazon delivery, not a police person, no one. I mean, neighbors. It's crazy.
When you just look at the process as it's going to play out, I know you said it would be difficult to mount any sort of substantive defense or go to trial. But what are the next steps if people, you know, who have been captivated by this story? I know we're getting ready for an arraignment, but kind of just what will we expect next?
Well, how it plays out, the attorneys are going to meet. So that'd be the state's attorney representing the state's interest, and obviously this young man's interest, the defense attorney, and it'll be a judge. And so it'll go back and forth. They'll give him discovery, which is all the information, which in this case they probably already should know what it is. And then at some point they negotiate. They'll say, okay, we're going to offer you charge X, and you may or may not be going to jail, and you're going to be on probation for a period of time, and then it's up to the defense to accept it or not, or they could bring it to trial, which, Eric, I think is a real daunting task. I would not want to be sitting next to Ms. Sullivan in front of a jury with this type of evidence.
One thing that we see a lot, journalists take the charges as they're charged and look at the maximum sentence and say this person could face 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. A lot of times, you know, and you see it in your practice, we see it in covering stories, the actual outcome will be substantially less. The person, if they have priors, if they don't, if they have a clean record, when all the circumstances are taken into account. We know the list of charges: assault, kidnapping, unlawful restraint, cruelty to persons, reckless endangerment. But is it possible to say what a range of sentences could even be in this case?
No, and the reason why, I mean, this is really just a first impression for me. I've never seen a set of facts like that, certainly not in Connecticut. With her, I don't believe she has a record, so you start there, and you can plead to whatever charge they may pick, and they all pretty much, it's all negotiation. I mean, I don't know. Maybe she has some issues that we don't know about. I mean, all this stuff is going to be fleshed out, so I don't want to be unfair to her defense. Maybe she has some psychological problems that were inflicted by her husband. Who knows? But I mean, she's going to have to offer a reason or excuse that's somewhat reasonable. It's really daunting, consider, you know, what happened to this young man.
Just very quickly, we're about out of time, but until you just said that, I mean, is that one possibility, a not guilty by reason of, you know, mental disease defect?
Well, she would have to be examined, possibly.
So that's something that may be under consideration.
I wouldn't rule it out.
All right. Given all these facts, it certainly could be in play.
For sure.
Walter Hussey, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.